I wish that I could be more hopeful, but this sample of books and the dozens of transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies books I've studied over the last 5 years do not lead me to a wishful conclusion. I think the top tier of human consciousness is going to be refined over the next 20 years, but the average is going to fall towards the lower end, and ultimately in this video I'm going to summarize some of the work of visionary thinkers like Abraham Maslow and Ken Wilber, who studied integral psychology or created the field of integral theory, and you may recognize books like The Spectrum of Consciousness, his 1970s work on the levels and lines of human development, or if you've heard of things like spiral dynamics, then you're likewise in familiar territory. But did you know that human consciousness studies go back even further? You might have heard of creative visionaries and great philosophical spiritual figures like Rudolf Steiner. He was studying these things, or go back even further to the foundation of the Theosophical Society in 1875. Figures like Annie Besant and Madame Blavatsky. Annie Besant right there, and one of my favorite books in my library on the theme, A Study in Consciousness. This is a copy from 1938. It was originally published, I believe, in 1909. Esotericism and theosophy goes back at least 140 years, but we've got even more than that. You can go back to Middle Ages and find various studies about human consciousness and the collective mass of consciousness. Why am I showing you all of these books when the title is indicating that it's a prediction for the year 2045? What I'm trying to do is show you that these aren't just my ideas. Fundamentally, my prediction is based on evidence gathered through systematic study of human consciousness theorists over the last 140 years or so at the very least. In general, what you can expect to find through primarily any integral psychology or spiral dynamics form of consciousness studies is that at any given point in time, around 5 to 10% of humanity is at the higher band of awareness. In brief, this means that they have the ability to hold multiple conflicting points of perspective, they have more of a spiritual, creative, and moral outlook on life, and they're generally well integrated from spirit to flesh. 5 to 10% of humanity at any given point in time. Practically, that means that if you walked into a local church or you walked into a local mosque or a synagogue, you could expect that 5 to 10 of the 100 people, even within that spiritual community, are likely to be at the upper band of integral consciousness. But is that true? Is that still true? In religious places of worship, you'd expect that a higher consciousness would be more highly represented. I almost led you into a false conclusion there, where why did you give the church, the mosque, and the synagogue? Why not the more average place, a supermarket, or just the community park? Surely you'd have a broader span of people at various levels of consciousness. That is true. But in the religious spaces, unfortunately, there is something to be said about what it actually means to be higher consciousness. To be truly higher consciousness, again, according to the theorists who've been working on these themes for decades, is the ability to hold plurality. And many people are fundamentally religious rather than holistically spiritual. You can still have very conventional beliefs in a very traditional Abrahamic faith, but if you don't have the ability to compassionately understand your brothers and sisters of other faiths, and the ability to mentally go into their belief system and not feel various shadow attacks and hate bonds forming inside of you, and I'm right, you're wrong kind of thinking, you aren't actually at integral consciousness. You need to have the plurality, and this applies not just towards the religious example that I gave there, but also the political example, and also anything to do with philosophical systems, let alone basic decisions like climate, or various politics around how to organize communities, or various politics about defense and war, and how to deal with nations and countries and various borders between them and the various geopolitics that affect us all. Integral consciousness, although it may seem like an aspirational standard, it's primarily what people like Abraham Maslow were aiming towards when he spoke about self-actualization. The pyramid of self-actualization at the very top is the integral band of consciousness. It's actually quite rare. And my understanding, theoretically, of 5 to 10% of people will get there in a given lifetime and represent that band across planet Earth at any given point in time. So 5 to 10% of people over the course of their individual lifetime will get to integral consciousness. And collectively, there's 5 to 10% of people at that level of consciousness on planet Earth at this given moment. I think it's too optimistic. My prediction for where we'll be in 20 years' time is that At best, we will maintain that 5 to 10% band. No more than 5 to 10 people out of 100 people will be at higher level integral consciousness. Again, if you think I'm giving an ambiguous definition of what that means, I do recommend that you read some of the books I've highlighted for a reason in this video. There's systematic ways of categorizing what is higher or lower consciousness based on various metrics that I don't have time for in this video. This is more of an intermediate video for people who are basically familiar with ideas around self-actualization. I think, ultimately, to cut a long story short, a bit of a ramble for the first 5 minutes of this video, but here you are still wanting my prediction. I've theory dumped on you just enough. I think, unfortunately, that the top band of human consciousness will not grow in terms of percentage. It won't go beyond 10%. The best case scenario is that top 10%, again, best case scenario, top 10%, people who I've discussed say even 1% would be fantastic. 1 in 100 people can maintain integral consciousness. Let's imagine 10%. The top 10% will use the resources that we have access to today, the technology that we have, the opportunity that we have, and they will become even more refined in their integral perspective. Think about it. Abraham Maslow spoke about self-actualization, and one of the ideas that he spoke about, in fact, I'll bring this out in Maslow on Management, the book to my left rather. Maslow on Management, this is a collection of essays, which I recommend you pick up. This book here is him talking about work and career. It is an entire series of essays, I believe from the 1960s, which intimately prove the point that work and career is tied to self-actualization. And according to Maslow, the self-actualized person cannot be doing unactualized work. He was writing about this in the 50s and the 60s. What does that mean today when we have technology? Well, what I think it means, and I'm proof of this based on the fact that I built this career through the internet and I have a global reach to some small degree, and I have the benefits of my personal inner world matching my outer world. I can have a self-actualized career, whatever that might mean. On my terms, a self-actualized career. This was very difficult in 1905 because there just weren't the opportunities. But even if the top 10% of people get the opportunity and have the resources and the skill to be self-actualizing career people, what happens to the majority? Unfortunately and controversially, I think that the way that technology is going, especially with the brain rot social media and the black and white thinking and the high charge political shadowboxing that's getting worse and worse, I think that the average bulk of consciousness is going to sink down towards the lower end of the consciousness spectrum. That's not me saying out of yippee, I get to be in the top band and there's going to be this massive gap between me and all these sheep down below me. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not going to swear, I think it's bloody heartbreaking. But I think that's what's going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years. The average person will fundamentally become more unconscious. A small band of people will become way more conscious than their contemporaries or even people 50, 100 years ago. Think about what it would mean to be a highly conscious person in 1905. Maybe you would be part of Annie Besant's Theosophical meditation group and you join your other dozen or so members in London and you'd have a meditation 3 or 4 times per week and you'd be reading a few books that you'd share between you. The resources that you had were quite limited. The impact that you could have would be quite limited. Maybe you'd affect your family and your local community. Now we have tools of technology and we have all the world's information at our fingertips. You've got a lot more opportunity than people did 100, 120 years ago if you are into esoterics and spiritual development and global change in one form or another. However, everyone else also has the opportunity to be more distracted and more manipulatable than ever. I don't know exactly where AI technology will be in 2045, but you've seen what's happened over the last few years and you've seen what's happened to your peers in terms of their awareness, their emotional states, their general level of spiritual interest, spiritual resilience. If you say, well, Jordan, that's ridiculous. My friends are all very conscious. Well, you're in the top band. You're in the top band and you're echoed. You're echoed by that which you are. You're isolated. You're in a bubble of consciousness. It's quite nice to be in a bubble of consciousness, but just admit that you're there. The majority of people are not there, and I think the gap is widening, and it's heartbreaking. What I think we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years is the spiritual consciousness equivalent of the wealth divide in second and third world nations, where very poor ghettos that are crime-ridden are right next to gated communities of the ultra-wealthy. Only this time it won't be literal cash, it's the cash of consciousness which separates the two. And I think something about tech addiction and staying away from substances and the food that we have as well, that's a huge problem. The richer, both in terms of financial richness, but primarily the spiritually rich, the richness of awareness, the richer 10% of society will continue to be richer than ever before. They will have tools and equipment and perspectives and information that no other human being has had access to for thousands of years, because we're developing as a society. But it's only the top 10%, maybe the top 5%, maybe the top 1% that will get to enjoy that. From a spiritual consciousness perspective, the gap will grow and it will become painfully difficult for the average person, because I think the collective average is sinking. I wish it weren't the case, but we saw what happened 5 years ago during the lockdowns. We've seen what's happened in terms of various nations around the world having a lot of political strife, and even the domestic politics of men and women not being able to get along, and the tragedy of public health. It's not looking good. Obesity will keep growing. Spiritual poverty will keep growing. Tech addiction and brain rot. You guessed it, it will keep growing. I don't see any significant reason why in the next 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, the average person, the baby who was raised on the iPad, for the last 5 years will become the 25, 30-year-old in 2045, why they would have the ability to reach the higher bands of consciousness when they have unfortunately been dealt a stinky hand. The stinkiest of hands, dare I say. They've been set up for low consciousness living, and it's very unfortunate for anyone who's in their late 20s or onwards, like they didn't grow up with a screen. Anyone who's kind of 25 plus who'd be watching this video, you have some memory of what it's like to grow up outside of the screens at the very least. It's not the only factor that means you have the possibility of higher consciousness, but the particular use of, I'll get more technical for just a moment, give me a few minutes, I'll get technical on this. Ego development outside of social media and ego development outside of non-stop, highly stimulating, dopamine-driving YouTube content or short-form reels, the kinds of things that children are unfortunately consuming and have been for years, the iPad babies, to go through the ego development at very vulnerable stages of age 3 to roughly age 12, with or without the technology that we have access to today, creates very, very different psychological substructures inside of a child. And we won't see just how damaging those substructures are until the children reach maturity in their 20s and 30s, again, a couple of decades from now. You'll see what happens in terms of people's ability to form relationships. You're already seeing it. The lack of communication, the hatred between men and women, the general hostility and knee-jerk reactions that come up from things that people see on the screens, and the emotions that come up and the very unthinking ways of being. There's emotion in my voice. I'm sad to say that this is my prediction for where the world will go in 2045. I'm trying to represent the upper bands to whatever degree I can and be with other people, my shadow work library and my clients and students who want to read these books and try and be awake and aware, and I try and represent that. And you can call me arrogant and say, well, who are you to say that you're in the top 10%? You might disagree. Maybe I am truly in the brain rot masses. Maybe I'm one of them. Maybe because I spend too much time scrolling, every now and again I am indeed doomed like everyone else, in which case I haven't got much hope for the future. We might be too locked into a system that's working against us. We might be swimming in a sea of unconsciousness and expecting that our light of consciousness could shine the dark in the storm and make it go away, but it just won't. We are too small and too insignificant compared to the forces against us. I hope that's not the case. I do believe that we will see in the next 20 years some incredible breakthroughs in philosophical and spiritual awareness. For millions of people, millions upon millions of people, will be more aware than human beings have ever been. That's inspiring. But billions of people will be less aware than they could have been if we didn't unfortunately lose some of our soul to the screens and the tech and the knee-jerk political, social, shadowboxy dynamics that are very, very, very pervasive, let alone the polluted food and polluted water and very bad living situations for many people. That is my prediction. I wish I could go back to Annie Besant, who wrote this book in 1909, and say, Annie, I really do respect Annie. Annie's a fantastic teacher. Let's call her Mrs. Besant. Mrs. Besant, you motivated me. I read your words about coming together with friends and meditating and sharing informed essays and newspaper clippings of things that would make a difference in the community. And you were doing that. You were making a difference in the community. But their brains are different now. It's been 115 years. We don't think the same anymore. We don't have the ability to focus anymore. We're no longer a literate culture. We don't have the ability to think in full sentences. We don't have the ability to focus for more than a few minutes at a time. They're not ready for meditating for hours. They're not ready for fine ideas about the nature of God and the nature of their spirit. We're just trying to get them off the screens. And I wonder what she'd say. I wonder if she would lose hope. I'm not losing hope overall. I'm interested in what the discussion might be in the comments section, but it does, in summary, look like the top band will become even more refined, the average will sink towards the bottom, and the bottom will expand in terms of, again, I'm not saying that this is a hierarchical system. If you don't know some of the books that I'm referencing, I'm talking about higher consciousness studies. I'm talking about the systematic breakdown and structuring of the spectrum of consciousness. Read a book like this one from Ken Wilber. You'll see that various intelligences are basically systematically organized. I'm not going to summarize it for you in this video. I'm just aware right then. You can see that in that moment, I'm aware that I'll have been misunderstood or misrepresented myself even. I'll take responsibility for misrepresenting myself by not giving a full background of the material that I'm referencing. But you can't win. You can't win. Basic idea, it's in spiral dynamics. Read it for yourself, come to your own conclusions. My prediction, it'll be good for those at the top, but we will become more isolated and more segregated, not just in terms of financial wealth, but in terms of spiritual wealth as well. I don't know what that means for me. I don't know what that means for you. I'm just giving my opinion. Give yours down in the comment section. I read and respond to everything, at least as much as I can. I'll see it. I'll read it. I don't feel good about this video. You see my emotions in the last 90 seconds or so. I was stumbling over my words. I don't know if I should release this one. If you're hearing these words, I obviously did release the video. It's just not very hopeful. I don't know the solution. But I doubt that the theorists who I have read were correct, because many of them were writing before the technology that we have. I don't think it gets better. I don't think the top 10% will lift everybody else up. I don't think the Maharishi effect is in effect anymore. You can't drop 1,000 monks into the city and raise the consciousness of everyone else. The screens have done something to us. And time will tell how badly we'll pay the price. I'll see you in the comment section.